Welcome, everybody, to the Messenger Reveals. Today I have a special guest with me, Dr. Josh, who was kind enough to come on. Welcome, Dr. Josh. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good this morning. A little worn out and exhausted from my late night hiatus, up talking with other fellow atheists and agnostics about worldviews and beliefs.
I don't know
So,
how you do it. You were telling me about it a little bit beforehand. It's seems like a crazy schedule.
that's exactly. I think I burned the candle too much at each end, and eventually I think it's probably why I'm feeling a little sick and under the weather. Is not taking care of my physiology very well or biology very well.
Hmm.
So how you been?
Yeah, not too bad. We were on Talking Doctrine last night for it ended up being 2.5 hours, which by the
That's
end I
that's
think
short.
Skylar was.
That's short for him for talking
Everybody,
for
yeah,
Matthias.
Phew, man, Skylar was. I think Skylar has a really difficult schedule, so he was pretty tired by the end, but he toughed it out.
That's
But yeah, it
awesome.
was good. It was a good conversation.
And I'd like to go ahead and welcome Atheist Rationale and Aaron Benton to the live chat. Looks like they stopped by to say hello. And you've talked with Aaron Benton, haven't you? Like on Skylar Fiction's channel?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know he stopped on. Like I watch a lot of like Skylar's channel and watch you on your channel and your wife that come on. I found more openness in the atheistic and agnostic communities than I have with the Christian community online. I've
Hmm.
probably been booted or blocked on almost every Christian channel I've been a part of at one time.
I am not surprised.
I went on Talking Doctrines. I was on his show a couple times, and those conversations were more like 3.5 or 4 hours.
Yeah, he is definitely the anomaly. I mean, he's probably the most easygoing human being I've ever come across.
He
So
is. He's a super nice guy. Like
yeah,
I would sit down and have a conversation with him outside of this community. It's just I'm not a fan of his version of Christianity or his, King James only, very dogmatic, very rigid. King James proves itself type of situation. And welcome, one guy. How are you? He's another Gnostic that hangs out in the atheist and agnostic community. He's a cool guy.
yeah, it's very it's interesting because I can't think of somebody that I probably disagree with more uh, than than Matthias. I mean, at least on those types of issues, down to like a flat Earth. But
Sure.
you just wouldn't know from the conversation that we disagree with each other so much because he's just such a nice guy and we get along so well. So no, I really enjoy his company.
I think that's something that's good when those things happen where people actually are amicable and they're not cutting and they're not trying to one up each other, but they're rather, hey, let's have a reasonable conversation, and even if we disagree, let's at least show each other a level of hospitality and respect. And I
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I've said this before, but I apologize for my voice. I'm still kind of getting over a cold. Um, but one of the things that I always say is, and again, it's one of the reasons I don't really like debating, is because debates are generally there to win, right? You're there to win,
yeah,
and that's not really what I'm about. I'm there to come to a better understanding of the data and a model that ties the data points together. So that's the nice thing about Matthias, and it's because when we disagree, you almost feel bad saying it. You're like, look, I totally see why, and he says the same thing to me. I get why you're saying that, but here's maybe another way of thinking about it. But your way, I understand it, and that sort of thing. Thinking about the feelings of the other person and not wanting them to feel dumb and not wanting them to feel like they've been one upped. It's rare I've seen in this community, at least with opposing sides. So
yeah, and I don't always do a good job with that. I'm more direct and harsh at times, and I kind of almost mirror who I'm talking to. If somebody demonstrates a level of humility and openness and curiosity, like they don't have to agree with me, but are they humble and curious enough to consider what I'm saying? I give people that same respect. But if somebody like raises their level up with me, then I don't have a problem either raising my voice if I feel like I'm talked over. But I don't use cutting attacks, and regardless of what they do, that's just not part of my being. But I am very harsh and direct and go, no, that's not a correct statement. That's an ignorant way to view this, and here's why.
hmm.
And I don't mean ignorance in terms of stupidity, more so than we just lack knowledge, or I believe you lack knowledge about something, you in general.
Yeah, which is something that I think people generally have a very difficult time. It's the people that can say I don't know and feel comfortable saying that. Those are the people that I really like having conversations with, because being able to say I don't know really is the key to unlocking. Well, I mean, really getting ahead at all in any field. And if you can't say I don't know, that means you can't learn. Um, I mean, really, I really think that's true. And so, what's funny is I've been up against whatever people, uh, and and if they're very harsh, or they're very strong willed, whatever it is, and they're being kind of rude. The moment that they say, "Oh, I mean, I could really have my ire up." I try not to let that come through, but the moment that they say, "Oh, I didn't really mean it that way," everything just kind of crumbles inside of me. Oh no, it's totally fine. It was just me, and I'm sure that you're right, and so it's
Yeah, I know you feel bad. Like you really sympathize with people, and you can tell when they're distraught or they're frustrated or they feel defeated. And I think that you, from that aspect, have like a deeper care for them than a lot of people I've seen online. You're
it's.
overly apologetic, and you know that.
I'm really sorry about that.
So then, yeah, you must be really sorry about being overly apologetic.
It's this idea, and Skylar tells me this all the time. It is the reason that I'm not a good debater, is that when you box, once you get inside their guard, that's when you strike, right? And
Hmm.
and that's the moment that I don't want to strike,
Sure.
because it's like, oh gosh, this is going to be very obvious. If I point this out, it's going to be very obvious that you're wrong, and you're going to feel bad, and I don't really want to do that, and that's in my control to not do that. So I'll deflect away from that, or I'll steer away from that, because I feel like the audience has picked up on that. We don't need to harp on it. Let's move on to something else. Um, but
Sure,
yeah.
because you're showing a level of compassion for people, and that's just part of your nature and who you are.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I like that's important, and I love when you sit there and say people saying I don't know is very powerful, because even in clinical counseling, a lot of people who are in therapy don't want to be in therapy. They're there because either family members told them that that's like the last straw, or they're court ordered, or they're part of the justice system as a child or teenager, and they have to go to therapy, because they're either in foster care, or they've been removed from the home, or they've been abused, and then they still don't want to be there. They don't want to be stigmatized with a label of I'm unhealthy and I can't function in this world without something like therapy.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I asked a lot of the time goes along the lines of that, which is, how do you know what you don't know?
Hmm.
And I think that forces people to get to a place of curiosity, or you'll see a lot more deep rooted resistance that pops up because of it, trying to mask it. I had a kid client say that's a stupid question. And I'm like, is it really a stupid question, or is there only stupid because there's only one way to answer it? And they're like, yeah, there's only one way to answer it, and I want to have a choice.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, you did have a choice, but do you understand all the determinants that go into your choice?
Hmm.
And when you use different language and different words than people are accustomed to hearing, it does make people curious.
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of what's set me apart from a lot of Christians that atheists or agnostics run into. And I don't consider myself a Christian. I don't use the label, but because I believe, I worship God and still believe in Him, and I also believe in the teachings of Jesus and that He was the Son of God. That still lumps me into the Christian,
Kind of put you in that camp, yeah.
in that camp of the other, 80,000 denominations and doctrines of belief within Christianity. But I believe that, my deep understanding of human behavior in my studies that I did strengthened my viewpoint on that. Like, I would say that I take human behavior and it leads me to a belief in God more so than I try to make the Christian worldview fit within human behavior.
Hmm.
So if I sit there and say I'm a unique collection of the knowledge and experiences that I've been, either lucky or unlucky to have been exposed to, and that's who I am, and I believe that you're a unique collection of your knowledge and experience that you've been lucky or unfortunate enough to have been exposed to that make you you. then if you keep going backwards in time to your parents and in their interactions, and then their parents and then their interactions with humanity, where's the beginning of it? Can it really have evolved from something that didn't have a level of intelligence and knowledge, or language even, or the way that we formulate our, or even share or communicate with one another? Like when it comes to language, I would say from my own worldview, I'm like, language can't originate from nothing. I don't believe that's possible. Because who would be the first one to sit there and that a language became language verbally first, and then all of a sudden we're going to design an alphabet or a series of symbols that articulate that language? Like, I would say people who did hieroglyphs would be exactly how it occurred. Like hieroglyphs were pictures that denoted a story. If I'm, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not an alphabet where you can write out a list of words and phrases and write your own book based on hieroglyphs.
Yeah, unfortunately, I never delved into the Egyptology side as much as I would have loved. We do know how writing was invented.
Sure.
Which came from really an economic impetus. But yeah, how language started. Yeah, I think it's certainly above my proverbial pay grade.
Right, and I end up in the same thing where, no, I don't have anything provable. I speculate. You take evidence of, okay, here's what we are in as far as human behaviors, and I believe I have a very good scientific understanding of who we are as a people. Then I have to sit there and speculate origin. And so if I speculated origin with language or creation, if I still hold a creation viewpoint, I would hold the worldview of the creator, alien or supernatural, in the beginning, designed or engineered us in a way and put different, races of human beings throughout the planet, and then also gave them their own unique languages. For whatever reason, and why they're different, I don't know. But like when I've studied some of the videos that atheist and agnostic had suggested, like this, migration of humans that traveled up through Africa and then over across the Middle and Far East, and then came down into Australia, and then from Australia went up into, Canada, North America, and then came down into, North America and Central America. When they showed those paths and they showed those, and forgive me my ignorance on the terminology, but their genomes, or there was a trace thing that was within males that they could trace back over a period of time, like a signature gene or a signature, I don't know, chromosome, whatever it was, that linked all these things together. I still found it interesting, even in the video, when they got to the North American Native Americans, that when they asked them where they believed their origins came from, they said the ground. Like, they didn't say, oh, we believe in something different. They still believed that they came from the ground, which really gives not only a Genesis account, but also even a Sumerian culture account of creation. So if I had to speculate even from my own worldview, and I know this was the nature of the conversation, I really want to dig into Genesis with you and your, extensive understanding of the Hebrew language, which is why I've really wanted to have you on. But I know this is kind of, piggybacking and continuing off our original conversation on Skylar's channel. I get to the point of saying, how is it possible that God took previous Homo erectus or Homo neanderthal or Homo Cro-Magnon man and then redesigned a new being in more like his own image and likeness, if he was something that was like us physically? And I say Homo sapien was the first species out of all those to be able to pretty much dominate a planet in the way that we have. That we were self-sufficient, unlike those predecessors or those other previous creations, or maybe other pre-existing here even before God showed up. So from my standpoint, I'm sitting there saying, well, I believe Homo sapien was created in God's image and likeness physically, and that we have the ability to become like him in our inner being. And I believe that was more along the lines of in the teachings of Jesus, who said, conform to his image and his likeness, and that he shared and represented the internal image of God. Like I never believed that Jesus was God before he was here. But I believe he became divine in his nature, as I believe we can all become divine in our nature if we learn and grow and become healthier versions and better versions of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean,
I
but
know. I know. So let's table that and get into. Maybe we can continue that some other time on Skylar's or another, live stream, discussing, our heritage and our or the origins of mankind or origins of Homo sapien, but it's not my area of expertise. It's not my
yeah,
field.
definitely not mine either.
Like I really wanted to put to test some of the beliefs that I have, and I use beliefs and knowledge very differently. With knowledge, I say it's provable things that I can prove to you scientifically or evidence based facts. Whereas if I say what I believe it's an assumed truth, something that we hold to be true, like a fact, but we don't have concrete evidence to support it, but we haven't been given any type of evidence to disprove it or accepted any type of evidence to disprove it. And I believe that human beings, by and large, for their own makeup, are mostly having beliefs for information rather than facts or knowledge. Like the majority of the things that we hold to be true in the world are beliefs and not knowledge. And I know that doesn't carry a philosophical definition of those words, but if you use a philosophical definition for belief and knowledge, they're pretty interchangeable. And you'll hear a lot of people say knowledge is a subset of belief. And that was just written by a philosopher. And then people now believe it's, the rule of how knowledge and belief should be used, but it's just one person's definition of them. No different than I'm having my own. Mine do match dictionary definitions that we use in Webster's and, Merriam-Webster's, versions versus those philosophical or even psychological argument or definitions for them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I understand what you mean by the distinctions between the two. So I think I'm.
Yeah, so if I sit there and
with
say I believe this to be true, then you can see, okay, he's not saying he knows this and he can prove it. He's saying that's his belief, and until he receives some information that disproves or it's in contrary to it for him to examine, then he can't think outside of that.
right.
It's just, again, I think people would have healthier conversations if they would say, I think, I believe, or I know the correct way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was actually talking to someone recently, and I can't remember for the life of me who it was, but I'm always extraordinarily careful, and this just happens, as you know, when you start getting further into grad school. The further you go, the less you know, and that's how it feels to you. It's not true, right?
Right.
But it's because the body of information that opens up in front of you for you to master is just overwhelming, and you say, I don't know anything compared to what's out there to know.
Sure.
And it's one of the things that I think people that don't walk down that hallway of whatever you want to call it, formal education. That's not the only way to do it, but it's just a sort of a typical way. They don't get that oftentimes because what they see is very narrow and is this narrow body of information that they can master. And so comparatively speaking, they would say, yes, I know this to be true, because they're not aware of all of the other things that are involved. And it's the reason that I say all the time, if you think it's simple, you probably don't understand it. And I think that's just, I think that's a fair representation. But I was talking to somebody and I said, I might have been talking about prophecy and Ezekiel or something akin to that. And I said, it seems as though this is the case. Well, the word seems, when I use it, is I've aligned these 37 data points that I've gone into great detail about in this model of interpretation and they all fit very, very well.
Right.
However, there may be 4 other data points that we don't have yet. And so I'm not going to say I know that this is true about this particular text, because that would be foolish, I think. However, from somebody else's perspective that doesn't look at things that way, they would say, seems, that's so weak. It seems that way. You think that's true, do you? Well, why should I listen to that? It's like, well, okay, you think it's simple, you probably don't understand it. So
Well, and it's not giving any type of respect or understanding of your own educational background, and that you're not just making an assertion as a layman who Google searched something for a week. And if people are curious enough to understand why you may think that it seems to be that being the truth, they would be more curious and going, well, if he's holding that point to be true, there's probably a lot of information that goes into that conclusion for you.
And that, and in no way does that mean that it's right. I mean, and I
And
think that's the
that's why you're not saying I know.
exactly. And I feel like there's always this tension, right? Particularly with what Megan and I do on Digital Hammurabi. We're trying to bring good, reputable scholarship to people that don't have, that it's not to whom it's not readily accessible. And one of the tensions that we find all the time is trying to say to someone that is challenging us in that way, you don't understand this argument and the complexities of it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do the things that you're doing to try to understand it. And maybe to be more specific, a lot of times we interact with people that are saying, I did what you just said. I Googled, or they go further and they say, I have a Strong's Concordance, or, I have, I've looked at this Akkadian dictionary online, or, even people that go further and say, I've looked at Sumerian words and this is what they say. But they don't understand that it's far more complex than that. And you can't just go to a dictionary to determine, even if it's a very good, a credible dictionary, you can't just use that to determine. If that were true, we'd know everything, right?
Right. We wouldn't be having the arguments we have in regard to what this piece of old literature or scripture means.
Exactly. That's a tool, and the thing is, not only do you need more than one tool, but you need. Oh, you are the most amazing human being in the world. My wife is bringing me tea. I've had to give up coffee, which really, really, really stinks. But thank you, sweetheart. But I don't have any idea what I was saying. Sorry, John.
No, we were talking about you can't just use a dictionary, even if it's a strong dictionary, because I think you're
Right.
going to get into that context matters. And you said if it was really that clear in what it meant in terms of its literacy, I guess, then we would all be on the same page and there wouldn't be a difference of opinion.
Yeah, and I think that, and this happens in science, right? We see this all the time. I hear this, and I have no science background, right? I say that every time I talk about it, but I hear it a lot in these debates, creation versus evolution debates. And something is brought up by a creationist that says, well, look, these two evolutionary scientists, even separated by time, disagreed with one another. And so the whole thing must be, they can't even agree. It's like, well, again, the reason that these matters are debated is because of their complexity. And so the reason we go to conferences, the reason that we interact at this, these elite levels with these scholars that have been in the field for 60 years, the reason that we do that is because these issues are extraordinarily complicated. And not only are they complicated as they stand, but in our field, we continue to discover more cuneiform tablets. We continue to have developments in the way that we understand lexicography. And because of that, in the end, you always have to say, I hold this tentatively, right? I hold this position as much as I think I understand it right now. This could change, and I could be wrong about it. And I think it's just the arrogance of saying, no, X is true. And when you're coming at it from an inductive standpoint, X is true,
Right.
and I know it. That's frustrating.
Yeah, because they don't have enough information, and we can't have enough information. Most people should defer to an agnostic view of it, and say, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't think we have the ability to gain that information yet.
Yeah.
And if people would be curious in that way, then they wouldn't have those strong emotions when people oppose them or when they're in a debate with somebody. They wouldn't personalize it.
Yeah, it's so much of it for me anyway, in my experience, it has to do with humility. I mean, having the humility to,
But you realize your
just,
education in itself gave some of that to you.
yeah, no question, no question. I used to
You
be
have
an
a master.
arrogant kid.
You have a,
There's no question.
and I don't know your background, but your education path and journey, and we briefly touched on this when you were like, hey, when you get into a program and you have students and students start questioning things, you're like, listen, I can understand why you're making that inference, but if you wait a semester,
Yep.
you're going to have a different worldview because you're going to understand the things that you don't have yet.
Yeah.
And you realize it because you've been through a similar path yourself.
It's really, it's really funny. And it's one of the reasons that I think I will sometimes chuckle to myself
I
when I
will.
get into these conversations, because I've, yeah, for those that don't know, I went to Johns Hopkins, got a PhD in Assyriology, with some of the greatest minds, I think, that are out there in the field, frankly. My advisor, Dr. Paul Del Nero, is just, I like every time I come in contact with him, I just feel inferior, right?
Right.
And the interesting thing about it is that, when you're at that level, everybody feels that way about everybody else.
Sure.
And we all come into class, and when you're faced with a new Sumerian text, that hasn't been translated yet, and we're sitting there with these signs, and we're looking at photographs, and we're trying to figure out what exactly is that. Is that a raw sign? Is that a do? Is that whatever? And then what would that mean? How should we read it? These are all things that it's like you could pull your hair out trying to figure out what they are. And in doing so, you always, when it comes your turn to translate, we always would preface it with, okay, I think I
Sure.
think we should read this line this way, but I could be wrong. Here's why I think it. And the person that says it always has all this lexicographical evidence that they've come up with. And it's almost always a very sound reading, a very defensible position. But it's just because we know
Sure.
we've come up with it, and the lengths that we've had to go to come up with it, and the possibilities that we've had to, say, well, I don't think it's this. I think it's more likely this. As many times as you do that, you think, gosh, it could be, I could be wrong. Yeah. So,
No, I mean that is having what I consider a sense of humbleness and a sense of curiosity to go. We're interpreting this based on these pre-conditioned and predetermined worldviews on how we do what we do. So this is our best version of it until somebody that had more information perhaps did it or built on what we had in a new way or found more tablets or things that suggested it was even more vast and in depth than what we understood it to be to begin with.
yeah.
And I'm that's not my area of focus, but that's my approach from a human behavior standpoint of being curious and being humble and going, we don't know what we don't know until we've discovered it or we've been exposed to it or we have had long enough to process and comprehend it.
Yeah.
And that just takes time. And that's why when I see, you know, 17 to 25-year-old kids making great proclamations about things, I'm like, you haven't been through the trials and experiences to substantiate
Yeah.
what you think you believe and know. I mean, your neural pathways are still developing until you're 25 years old, plus or minus a few years. We know that in psychology. We know that your ability to think abstractly and reason abstractly is going to change and grow, and you're going to become a better, stronger biological version of yourself still. But yet we, put 18-year-old kids on the street as adults that think that they, know everything and they have the ability to do what a 25, 30-year-old will do. They're just not seasoned and conditioned, not only from a cognitive standpoint or an experiential way, but also biologically, they're not fully developed. But we're saying, hey, here's the adult keys, go be an adult.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so many issues with drunk driving, unprotected sex, and people getting pregnant and people getting drunk and people getting high and people getting crazy in those college years because they can't manage risk versus reward. They don't have the cognitive pathways develop that go, is that really healthy? No, the reward, the pleasure sensor in the brain is so easily accessible, especially in teenagers, but also in early adulthood. That's just all they can do. They can't think about it. They can't go, that is not a possible. They're not considering the risks as much as the reward.
Yeah.
I guess is the best way to say it. And that just, you can't do that until you are roughly 25 years old and then older. And then how much knowledge and experience have you been exposed to or isolated from?
Yeah. And I think that, bless you. I think that for me, that's where the real struggle, it's where the real struggle is, because it's trying to engage with that type of individual, and say the work that you're doing is amazing, right? What you flipping through that Strong's concordance, you going to those apps on your computer or on your phone or whatever, and and reading the commentaries that or the articles or whatever. That usually is a step that they don't take, but reading whatever it is that you've read, the online blog posts or whatever that you've read, or the videos that you've watched, to try to get at the truth, or to get at the data points and an interpretation of the data points, is amazing. And I don't want to quash that. Right. Yeah, discourage that in any way. Thank you. But trying to say, realize that there's more, hold all of those, can keep digging in, keep challenging, but do it humbly, so that you say, hey, look, professor, hey, whoever you're engaging, here are my thoughts. Here's what I've uncovered. You have expertise in this field. What are your thoughts? Give me some, on the spot peer review here. And unfortunately, I think it seems like, and you would know this better than I, but it seems like that 17 to 25-year-old range is also a very arrogant period. And so, it's difficult because they think they know everything. It's difficult to have somebody say, okay, yeah, I'm going to take that humble position and say, I could be wrong about this. It's very difficult to do. So I get that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the neural pathways start switching to that formal, concrete thinking when we hit around 11 years old, plus or minus a year. So we've been starting to think and reason with abstract thought in a new way since 11. So by the time they hit that 18-year-old, they've already been doing it for almost half their life. So they're thinking and reasoning, and they're processing, and based on their intelligence, they may be very highly intelligent and they pick up things quick, but they don't know what they don't know because they haven't been measured and tested yet. Like, if everybody's nice to you and everybody's kind to you and everybody's considerate to you, it's easy to be nice, kind, and considerate. How do you act and behave when somebody's harsh with you or critical of you or negative or abusive toward you? That's going to really be a test of your well-being, because, like I said, it's easy to be loving when somebody's loving to you. It's easy to be nice and kind when somebody's nice and kind, but how do you feel and how do you respond when somebody's being critical or cruel to you? That's more of a measure of your internal well-being and your ability and resolve to deal with it, quote, in a healthy or functional way. And I think that people who haven't gone out and experienced the world, even if they would, they stayed at home till they're 30, they're still going to have a level of handicap because they haven't been tested and tried within their own inner being. If you don't live on your own and paying your own bills because you have a job and a career where you have to put up with a boss that may or may not treat you well, or you have a family that you have to take care of and a level of responsibility, those things change what you've been tested and tried on. Until you've had a kid screaming at you all night that you can't console, you have no idea what that trial's like and how you would face it.
Yeah.
And those are things that are very difficult that people don't understand. And when you live with your either girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife, it's different than when you're dating them and not living with them.
Yeah.
Because people always have these expectations that are very unrealistic about the nature of relationship and interaction with them. And if you're not curious and if you're not, I guess, considerate of, they're a unique collection of their knowledge, experience, and biology that's not me, and I cannot expect them to act, think, and behave the way I do, you're going to have problems. And you're going to have an inability to put your own shit on them or your own worldview on them that they're not capable of dealing with. No different if they did the same thing to you. Like, well, I expected this would have changed, and I would assume you already know this about me, and all these assumptions that people do going into a relationship rather than just being curious. Like, I went with couples, for an example, to kind of get off on a side, and I'll try not to go too far. They sit there and say, well, I shouldn't have to tell my husband or wife that I want this. They should know. They should just do it because they know that's what I want. And I'm like, what's the problem with communicating? Well, then it doesn't mean as much if I have to tell them that I want a back rub, or if I have to tell them that I'd like them to go to the store with me, or if I have to tell them that I'd like them to take the trash out without me having to remind them. And I'm like, people can still say no. People can still say, screw you, I'm not doing that, or I have zero desire to do that, and I'll never do that. I'm like, so be open and learn to communicate. And communication does not lessen the desire that they say, hey, you're important enough to me that I'm willing to do that. And hey, I'm absent-minded and sometimes I forgot, or I get caught up and I'm busy doing this and didn't think that I was being neglectful in that way. But if people get into that mindset of assumption and unrealistic expectation, it creates more problems than anything else in a relationship.
Yeah, no doubt.
So again, to me, it just, until people are tried and until they've been through those experiences, they don't know what they don't know, even if they have learned things by reading them online. Like, you can learn with like the right way to act and the right way to behave, and how to carry yourself and conduct yourself. And I see a lot of great actors in these communities. They act that way, but if you squeeze them in the least bit, you see all the shit come out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's knowing what affect to have, cognitively, knowing that in this circumstance, if I have this affect, then X will happen. But that's not something that's coming because of experience, because of what we would say coming naturally,
sure.
because of our life experiences. And that it's funny. I won't be specific in any way about this, but there was an individual that I don't even want to say, I critiqued, but I think in a very kind and uplifting way, frankly, and said, I think it's, amazing that this individual is doing this, and that this individual is working so hard to understand these things. I would just say that it's probably better to think, to do this than to do that. And the vitriol that accompanied the response to that was staggering, frankly. And I mean, I was in the Air Force for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I pastored a church. I worked in the jail as a chaplain. I've seen and experienced a lot of very angry people. And not to say that he was, the most angry, but it was just so surprising, given how delicately that critique was placed. And I think it fits into what you're saying. I think it's this is an individual maybe hasn't been critiqued, or hasn't been critiqued enough, or has that arrogance to say that, God, I know everything. And it's just a dangerous position to be in, I think.
Well, and from the standpoint of, when somebody acts and responds in a way that is surprising, when you're trying to show respect and care, and you're trying to approach it from a very caring and corrective criticism rather than just being harsh or cruel or judgmental, you still don't always understand. We don't understand what they've been through to where they've possibly been abused.
Yeah, no question.
And when I see like people who get very defensive when they're corrected or criticized, it gives you a telltale of how somebody's criticized them in a very negative way. And all it takes is for you to remind them of something that was painful or traumatic for them, whether it be an authority figure like a parent or a teacher or, a coach. If you remind people of stuff, they usually respond to those things in ways that you wouldn't expect. Because
that's a very good point. Yeah.
So like when people project back at you, it has very little to do with what you're doing, more so than it does their interpretation of what you're doing.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
And so that's how I learn not to personalize things. I'm like, I remind them of something. It doesn't mean I am that something. It's not
Mhm.
about me. Because, quote, a healthy person or a sound or a resilient person isn't going to respond or behave to me in that manner, even if I was attempting to be cruel and harsh and critical in a
Mhm.
negative way. Because if people are that way with me, I'm not going to get offended. I'm
Yeah.
not going to personalize it because of what I've learned how to do. Not
Yeah.
because
I
I'm
mean,
something special or I can just continue to act that way and I'm bulletproof from my exterior and I build these huge walls. It's I'm not personalizing what they're doing. I'm trying to really empathize. I'm trying to go, what's going on the inside that makes them do what they do.
that is a really good point. And I think that's, now that you say it, I think that's something we should all bear in mind during these interactions is, trying to understand what the other person has gone through, even if we can't know it in detail, or even in actuality, just trying to say, perhaps I shouldn't judge so harshly this response and the way this person is behaving, and not just in a debate format, but just in life in general. I think that's a really good point to make.
Yeah, and like I said, I wouldn't have it if it hadn't been given to me by something or someone. That like if I can do something well, it's not because I'm special.
Hmm.
It's because of what I've been given. And when people behave poorly, I look at them the same way. I'm like, they've been given that poor coping skill for dealing with that negative abuse that they may have received in the past. They haven't been given a better and healthier way of coping with it. So when I see people behave poorly, however it is, if they're alcoholics or they're drug addicts or they're somebody who's coping with life in an unhealthy way or they're dysfunctional because they're always anger and always projecting on people and always being defensive or critical in their own right, I'm like, that's how they survive.
Hmm.
That's how they've learned to survive this world, to where they're either not harming themselves or harming others.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it may not be the right thing, and I'm not condoning what they do, but I understand it. And all I attempt to do is there an opportunity for me to crack through that hard shell, to sit there and have a reasonable conversation to say it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
You don't have to break out the nuclear missile when somebody says that they don't like something about the way that you think and reason. But I understand that that's how you survive and cope in this world, because of how you've been treated and what you've been given to deal with it.
Yeah.
But most people, have that sense of, I always call it pride and ego. Like, nope, I'm not letting you in, because when I let you in, I get hurt. And then I'm like, that makes sense. I wouldn't let me in either.
Right. Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
you don't know if I'm going to do something malicious with it. So that's fair. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I believe that like complete strength in self, esteem and well being. I'm trying to think of the right words. Lies in like a level of person's strength and well being lies in their ability to be vulnerable.
Mm.
To sit there and say that I don't need to have these walls up to protect what's wounded on the inside. I'm an open book, because I realize it's okay to be imperfect, it's okay to fail, and it's okay to make mistakes. And if you're pointing out my failures, mistakes, and they're true, I'm okay with that, because I don't have to feel bad about it. I don't have to beat myself up about it. I don't have to feel less than about it. All I have to do is go, I'm missing something. I'm going to be curious and go figure out what that answer or solution is now.
I
And
mean,
that,
I could not agree more. Vulnerability is probably the key ingredient that, and just thinking about what we're doing here on YouTube. I haven't been on YouTube, but maybe a year, probably not even that long. And one of the things that I see over and over and over and over again is the lack of vulnerability. I'll give you a good example. There was a debate recently, and I see Raging Atheist is in the chat. So sorry, Knock, I'm going to use you here. He was in a debate recently with Matt Powell. I'm sure most of us saw that, which I thought was a total disaster, because I think Matt Powell is an unbelievably dishonest human being. And but the thing is, just a short digression. Like Matt Powell is somebody I tried to talk to him early on. I wanted to have a conversation because of just the thing that we're describing here. I think that Matt Powell has, I mean, I think there's some, I think there's hope for Matt Powell, right? I think that a lot of what he's saying is, and you would, of course, know this far better than I, but I mean, I think it's a product of the experiences that he has had. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this vitriol. We're seeing this posturing that he has to do. But I think deep down, uh, it probably Matt Powell could be, if he could be broken out of that context, broken out of that cultural situation that he's in. But at any rate, um,
No, you're like me. There's hope for all humanity if there is hope. and,
yeah,
and it does take, like if you don't have a circle of influence in somebody's life to where they look at you as an authority figure, it doesn't matter what you know.
yeah,
If you could have all the answers in the world, but if they're not looking for those answers from you or from me or from somebody else, they're certainly not going to listen. And like if they believe, oh well, you hold an atheistic or agnostic viewpoint, so therefore you deny and reject the thing that gives me hope in life, however you do it, then I need to fight against that no matter what you do.
yeah. And I mean, I the reason that he kind of stuck out of my mind, and then I'll get back to what I was saying. Sorry,
No, that's
um,
okay.
but I really feel like in a lot of ways I was like Matt Powell, in my early 20s, which, sorry for everybody that hears that if that's shocking. And maybe I'll be more precise about what I mean. I knew everything. I mean, you couldn't tell me a secret because I knew it already, and I knew the Bible inside and out. I have an hour and a half testimonial. I don't know what you'd want to call it on our channel where I kind of talk. I think I talk about some of this stuff, but I knew everything and I knew the Bible, and so but I would engage with people, and because I knew the text so well, um, I mean, people really thought that I was this great authority on the text. And then I went to seminary, right? I learned Greek and I learned Hebrew, and I went, oh shit, I don't know anything actually. And that's one of the reasons that when I see people engage with me sort of head on, and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. That is entirely possible. I might not know what I'm talking about. The thing is, you can't know that just yet. Now, you
Right.
can know it in the future. Please go to school, learn Greek, learn Hebrew, then you'll be well armed, right, to make these types of arguments. Um, but what I saw, sort of bringing this all back in that debate with Nakasuchi, was that you have one person that's willing to be vulnerable and one person that's not.
Exactly.
And I was so proud of Nakasuchi for that, because the amount of times that he said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But that doesn't take away from the point that I'm making here. And Matt would capitalize on that. He'd say, aha, you don't know anything. And to the audience, to people that aren't, really maybe paying attention or whatever, oh yeah, Matt's really wiping the floor with him, whatever. Nonsense. This is one of the reasons that debates are not a good, I think, are not a good litmus test for the arguments of the individuals. And I think that more so, his vulnerability showed up in the after show, because Cyrus the Skeptic, Ocean, Shannon Q,
Yep.
a bunch of other people came in, which I thought was amazing. Right? I thought it was fantastic. But the fact that Nakasuchi said, "Teach me," right? Teach me how to debate. Man, that is so difficult to do, and I just admire him so much for it, because vulnerability. And of course, Matt Powell makes a video where he cuts the hell out of that hangout, and makes it look like Nakasuchi's scared, and Ocean is scared, and Cyrus is scared, and Shannon is scared. And it's like, Matt, it's time to be vulnerable, right? It's time to let your guard down and learn something, because it's really the only way you're going to get ahead. And anyway, I think
Yeah,
that's really,
like
it's really
you
important.
use the word dishonest to describe them, but I think a better word is disingenuous.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's the reason why I don't like who Matt Powell is as a human being. is because he's very disingenuous. He doesn't care about people. He doesn't reflect the nature of Jesus in the way that I believe every Christian should be doing it if they claim to follow them. And any Christian that's not, I'm probably more harsh with than anybody on YouTube, is people who don't truly attempt or desire to reflect the nature of Jesus.
Yeah.
And Matt is very disingenuous. He doesn't care about how he thinks and reasons and affects. He wants, number one, he wants to be polarizing. He wants to be a Steven Anderson. He wants that type of negative feedback, because I think he believes the negative feedback gets into the we're going to be persecuted.
Yeah.
So if you're not persecuting Matt Powell from an agnostic or atheist or other Christian worldview, then he's not doing his job as a Christian. And it's a very unhealthy thing that somebody's taught him to believe.
Yeah.
So from my point, I think that's why he has an inability to come out of that.
Yeah.
Because who is he really going to look to as his next mentor or his next person that he considers an authority figure that he values their opinion? And anybody like that is not going to be anybody that tells him what I would tell him or you would tell him.
And that's why, I'll tell you, John, that's why I think that formal education, again, it's not the only way to do this, but it's just such a good way to do it. Because that's the attitude that I brought into seminary. And I'll tell a quick story. And then I do know that you have to go shortly. I don't want to keep you too long. But when I went to seminary, my first year, I think I was taking 12 semester hours of grad school, which was a pretty heavy load.
Yeah.
No, it was 17. The first semester was 17. It was insane. I had no idea why I did that. I took 6 classes. It was crazy. But one of the classes was hermeneutics, right? Of course, you got to take that your first year. And we had to write a 15-page paper on John chapter 3 and, what it meant to be born of water and born of spirit. And then we had to write on Hebrews 6, 4 through 6, right? Where those that have been, gone away from the faith cannot have had the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit cannot be renewed again unto repentance. What do those passages mean, right? And of course, those passages are chosen because so much ink has been spilled on what they mean, and yet there is no conclusive answer, right? There's no consensus view. And so but that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get the students to engage with all of these different points of view and then try to wrestle with it from a hermeneutical approach. Okay, well, I was a mid-acts dispensationalist, which probably nobody listening knows what that is. Good on you if you don't. But it's an ultra narrow, view of the biblical text, interpretation of the biblical text. And actually, my denomination, what I believed, we had the answer to Hebrews 6, 4 through 6. And I remember writing this paper with, I was unconsciously arrogant, but I was so excited that I'm getting ready to teach Dr. Kenneth Quick all about Hebrews 6. I'm going to reveal it, and he's going to read this paper, and it's going to be like, the teacher in what's the Christmas Story? A Christmas Story, right? Where she reads it, a Red Ryder BB gun, and she A++. That's what I thought was going to happen. And I handed it in, there you go. And man, a week later, it looked like someone had sacrificed a goat on that paper, right? It's a red ink everywhere. But at the end, it said, you did a fantastic job working so hard at this, and I look forward to all the great things that you're going to do. And it was like, and I felt so bad for him because he didn't get it, right? That's who I was coming into seminary. And I think that's where Matt Powell is. I think he's in a slightly different context, but, just as dogmatic. And I think that if Matt Powell were to enroll himself in I don't know what kind of a degree, I think he's going to college now, but I would encourage him, once he finishes his bachelor's degree, if he's serious about the biblical text, if he's serious about, living his life for Christ and understanding the Bible, go learn Greek and Hebrew. And you do that at a seminary that's going to teach them with rigor, right? That they're going
Mm.
to, linguistics is going to be a big deal. And you go learn Greek and you go learn Hebrew because that's the way you're going to come out of where you are.
If he can, you know,
If he can. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. But
and
that's what brought me out.
yeah, and that's the thing is for like that term that they use so often, that reprobate term.
Yeah.
To me, it's the person who can't break free from the dogmatic viewpoints that they're within, and they don't
Mm.
even realize they're more reprobate than those that they accuse of being it.
Yeah.
And not reprobate to where you're a heathen and you're lost. It's you're so caught up in the doctrinal and indoctrinated viewpoints that you hold to be true that you're not willing to consider that you just might be wrong.
Yeah.
And then through that becomes this inner foundation of bigotry, which means you have a complete intolerance for anything that differs from what you believe.
I mean, look at what they've that other cat, which may be worse. I don't know, that Ben the Baptist kid.
He is. I mean,
I,
he's less healthy than Matt Powell for sure.
I mean, I I sometimes will go over to his channel when I'm feeling masochistic, and I'll look at something that he's put up, and a couple of weeks ago there was a video that was up there where he's railing against a former member of his congregation that has surprisingly split off from their church.
Yeah.
What a big surprise that a group that huddles up with all of their members and then looks around at all the members of their huddle and says, now, where do I disagree with you? Where do I disagree with you? And the person, this individual that he's talking about, apparently used to be like his really good or maybe his best friend. Now, maybe he's going to heaven. Maybe. It's like, come on, man. Like, probably he believes just a little bit different than you do. And yet that heresy, right? Going to hell, probably. Who knows? It's just.
Well, that's how, like, even with Matthias, he has this quote salvation meter. And when he talks to and discusses doctrine with people, he'll give you a percentage for what he thinks the probability that you're getting to heaven is.
Really?
Yes.
He has not told me about that. I'll have to ask him about that.
Yeah, I blew it up on YouTube last summer because he was saying he was leading on about people's salvation, and I'm like, what, do you have an algorithm? I'm serious on this. I was like, what, do you have an algorithm for one's salvation? And I'm not joking. He actually said, well, actually, I kind of do.
It's the saveometer, I guess it would be.
Savometer. But exactly. And so I kept fueling it from that point on. I'm like, oh my God, this is beautiful. If I can get him to keep talking about this, he's going to blow up his whole Christian community. Because that's kind of what I did is I went to these different communities and made them all take sides. Because
wow.
they were all huddling together underneath a banner of Jesus, and they all had different viewpoints, and they were all unwilling to discuss them. So I would go to each of their channels and I would bring up points that would sit there and get them into these differences so that they could think and reason, consider things. And they isolated themselves all from each other. They all blew up. It took about 3 or 4 months. But I blew up a lot of groups because of how they were being so dogmatic and anti this and so bigoted towards anybody with a difference of opinion that I brought out all their unique differences of opinion. I'm like, well, Bob says this and you say this. Why are you guys fighting about this? Why don't you discuss and see who's right? And then they just blew up because they have an inability to have those healthy conversations.
Yeah. And now they've gone out from us. Therefore, they were never among us.
Exactly. Exactly. The you never really believed.
Yeah. God. I can't tell you how much I love hearing that.
But for me, it's like if I don't go out there and do those things, then they don't change. If I don't go out there and I get people to question, and I don't want to get them to question to where they fall away from God, because I think that if you don't learn to question things, then you end up being 40, 50, 60, 70 years old and wonder why your life sucks.
Yeah.
You're alone. You're isolated. There is no relationship with other people. You're just either online or you're in front of your TV watching Netflix all the time because you can't interact with human beings in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people get to as they get older. That's why I think people become introvert, is because they haven't learned to be able to really enjoy or embrace the interpersonal relationship with human beings. It's just been too painful and damaging for them.
Yeah.
And I think people that get into religion, like Christianity, are very much like that.
Yeah.
You know, they stick to their churches, they stick to their groups. They don't want to see anything outside of that. They want to believe, hey, even though my life sucks now, I got this awesome magic Jesus ticket to heaven. So even if it sucks now, I got eternity of awesomeness.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what if you don't?
Yeah.
What if you really don't? And I mean that sincerely. Like, what if you're they praised me with their lips, but their hearts were far from me? How do you know you're not that person?
Yeah.
And isn't that going to be a rude awakening? Because then you had an opportunity of X amount of years to really look at your own self and how you can become a healthier version of yourself and maybe enjoy life here. And maybe that is what it's about.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree.
well, we did not touch Genesis at all.
That's okay. I'll come back on and talk about it.
I would be very thankful and humble to have you come back on and really, I want you to help me better understand what I believe.
Well, I'm flattered that you say that. Of course, there are people that are far more educated in biblical studies than I am. But I appreciate that. If you want to, if you have like a list of questions, maybe, or things that you want to talk about, you can send them to me.
Good idea.
And I have something that I'm trying to work on now. But yeah, I can do some research, and if there are things that I'd like to get some clarification on, it's one of the things that we do. I have access to a tremendous number of scholars in the field. So yeah, I think we can definitely do that if you want to shoot me some questions. If not, that's totally fine too. I can just come on. We can wing it.
No, I think no. Winging it would be fun from just an organic standpoint, and maybe for the audience, but I really want answers. So I would rather have it be that you're prepared and that it wasn't something like, well, let me think about that and let me look it up. If you've already, if you could just be like, oh, here's what I discovered, or here's what I read about that.
Sounds good.
It would be more concise. So I'll definitely take that burden of making time to prepare that list. And then you say, hey, okay, I've done adequate research. So whether it's, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, or we can, in the meantime, even come back on and have an awesome conversation like this, because it's really been enjoyable and refreshing for me. And I think even like the people who came in and were listening in the side chat heard a lot of good things from both of us. So
yeah, I think it was good.
So again, thank you for your time. I greatly appreciate you coming on, and I'm all about last minute. Like, if you give me an opportunity to talk, I'll take the opportunity to talk, even if it's not prepared.
Right.
So
no, I think it's been good. Well, look, you have fun with your discussion later on, and
that's gonna be a bowl of cherries.
hopefully, vulnerability will be something that both sides engage in. So
sure, we'll see how that goes.
Right.
All right,
I'm gonna go grab some lunch. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it.
Take care, buddy.
All right, man. See you.
Bye bye.